Obeisances to my Guru and protector Manjushri, who holds to his heart a scriptural text symbolic of his seeing all things as they are, whose under proclamation of the Dharma arouses us from the stupor of our delusions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma, whose powerful sword of wisdom heals down suffering wherever its sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of all ignorance, whose princely body is adorned with the 112 marks of a Buddha, who has completed the 10th stage of achieving the highest perfection of a bodhisattva, who has been pure from the beginning. Om Mara Padma. Om Mara Padma. O Manjushri, our loving one, with the brilliance of your wisdom, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind, enlighten my intelligence and wisdom so that I may gain insight into Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. To the perfection of wisdom indescribable by words or thoughts, which does not arise and does not cease in nature like space, whose object belongs to the individual's subject's awareness, I prostrate to the mother of the conquerors of the three times. Thus, as did I hear at one time, the Bhagavan was dwelling on the mass of Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. The Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration of the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also, at the time the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage of Advaita or the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, composition of factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, no definition, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no composition of factors, no consciousness. No eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no organ, no taste, no object of touch, no phenomena. There is no I element and so on, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom. The mind without obscuration and without fear, having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awakened to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment and reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequal, the mantra that truly pacifies all suffering, should be known as such since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared: Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasangate Bodhisoha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Avalokiteshvara, saying: well said, son of the lineage, it is like that. It is like that one should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharavakiputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding their entirety, along with the words of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised as spoken by the Bhagavan. I prostrate to the gathering of the Dakinis in the three chakras, providing the holy yoga of using space. By your powers of clairvoyance and articulation, look after practitioners like on a mother child. Aka samaraza, shara samaraza, Aka samaraza, shara samaraya, Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Soha. By the teachings of the three supreme jewels possessing the power of truth, may the inner and outer jewels be transformed. May they be dispelled. May they be pacified. May they be completely pacified. Shinto Puro Soha. May all negative forces opposed to Dharma be completely pacified. May the host of 80,000 obstacles be pacified. May we be separated from problems and harmful conditions to Dharma. May all enjoyments be in accord with Dharma. And may there be auspiciousness and perfect happiness here right now. The foundation of all good quality is the kind and perfect pure Guru. Correct devotion to him is the root of the path. Relating this and applying great effort, please bless me to rely upon him with great respect. Understanding that the precious freedom in this rebirth is found only once, is greatly meaningful and is difficult to find again. Please bless me to generate the mind that unceasingly, day and night, takes its essence. This life is as impermanent as a water bubble. Remember how quickly it decays and death comes. After death, just like a shadow follows the body, the results of black and white karma follow. Finding firm and definite conviction in this, thus me always to be careful, abandon even the slightest negativities, and bless all virtuous deeds. Seeking clark pleasures is a door to all suffering. They are uncertain. I cannot bear light upon. Using these sufferings, please bless me to generate the strong bliss for the risk of liberation. This clear thought, mindfulness, alertness, and great caution arise. The root of the teaching is keeping the Patimoksha vows. Please me to accomplish this essential practice. Just as I have fallen into the sea of samsara, beings. Please bless me to see the Supreme Bodhicitta bear the responsibility of freeing migratory beings. But I did not practice three types of morality, will not achieve enlightenment. In recognition of this, please bless me to practice the Bodhisattva vows with good energy. If I have pacified the distractions of wrong objects, correctly analyze the meaning of reality, bless me to generate quickly in my mind stream, unified path of stern abiding and special insight. Having become a pure vessel by training a general path, please bless me to enter the holy way of the fortunate ones, supreme Vajra vehicle. At that time, the space of accomplishing the two attainments is keeping pure vows and samaya. I have been firmly convinced of this. Please bless me to guard pledges and pledges like my life. Then, having realized the importance of the two stages, the essence of the Vajrayana, by practicing with great energy, never giving up the four sessions, please bless me to realize the teachings of the Holy Guru. Like that, may this show the noble path, and spiritual friends who practice it have long lives. Please bless me to pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. All my lives never separated from my perfect gurus, I enjoy the magnificent Dharma, completing the qualities of the stages and paths, and I quickly attain the state of Vajradhara.
Sangye churan zage chunam la jante bade da ne gebzu ji dage chudun gi be chunam gi la bende zange ru oru zange churan zage chunam la jante bade da ne gebzu ji dage chudun gi be chunam gi Habende zange bajo zange chudan sage chanabla jade bade dani gabsu chi dagi chiden ki betsu namgi dola bende zange du bajo. Okay, we'll just sit again for a few minutes. Okay, so welcome back, everybody. I was going to say you guys sound like the choir over there. So, yeah, this is our second week now of doing this live, so hopefully this works out well. I don't think we can see the people, which always makes it a little hard. You don't know how people are reacting, but hopefully you can all ask questions at the end, and that gives me an idea of where you are. And so let's continue. We've been talking about refuge. Right, I was looking back. We finished 3 pages last week, so we have 8 pages left in refuge. I thought I was going to finish refuge last week, but now whether we'll finish this week is not certain. But let's try. So we'll just get right to where we were. We're in the context of talking about the tumongilapcha, right? The common advice, meaning that it's common to all 3 jewels, right? So once you've taken refuge, so right, we have to go back a little bit before. We had the manner of going for refuge and so forth, and then after that comes, after having gone for refuge, then how to train. You might know, like when you go to Sojong, right? You say Shenyang nigi lama medebetang, chawa nama shiwa chipetang, soba nama shiwa chipela sopa, shichudu ton, julun namtrek tang, lun trensek tang, shung dampa namgi, jungne. You guys have it? No? Jungne. Oh, this is, sorry. This is Gelong's recited, that's why. But it might be also in your Getzo one. Yeah. Namni jungne. And then Shenyang kabji lapchadang gawatang. Gelangi migitu pongi tutu nagawa sopa. So kabja lapchadang gawa, it's saying ways that I've contravened the advice for going for refuge. Right? So that's also part of your training as a monastic, or even as also as a layperson, right? So you have the 5 precepts that are kind of the yongdrak, everyone knows them, right? They're not to kill, not to steal, and so forth. But there's also the lapcha is still precept in that. That's why they use the word precept in the book, right? So it's still something that you want to try to train in. So as for a gelong, if you contravene that, it's a nyeche. Like there's a lot of things are nyeche. We say just a fault, or like a minor fault. But so it's good to learn in these and train in them. It doesn't mean you have to go get paranoid that you're going to break the vow. That's not really the point, right? As I always say, it's like learning a sport. You learn the rules, right? Then you play better, right? You're not expected to know every rule from day one, but the better you know the rules, the more you can play in accordance with the way that it's practiced. And so you learn this over time and get used to training in this way. So we had among there's a tumon waibe lapcha, right? So the sosawa lapcha, actually, the ones for each of the individual 3 jewels. Right, so like going for refuge to the Buddha, then you don't go to refuge to worldly gods. Going refuge to the Dharma, you abandon harming others. Going refuge to the Sangha, you abandoned associating with non-virtuous friends. So here is the Tunmong Wed Lapcha, so it's the general precepts for all of them. So last week we had the Chupa Chawa, the way that you offer homage to them, right? So you have, within that, then you have 6 things, right? So you have Kontruki Kepar Nyodin Shepe Gone. So you remember again and again the particular qualities of the jewels, and then go for refuge 3 times by day, 3 times by night. And I said that's why you recite the Tundrik Lame Neldra, the 6-session Guru Yoga. And then, now remembering the kindness of the 3 jewels, then striving to make offerings to them again and again. So this has been a very long section. So we had 10 ways in which you make offerings. We did that last week. Now it's what kind of mindset do you have when you make the offerings, right? Chepe sampa gangtan dempa. So chupa chupo de kontrok sumla chupa ni yonsu zupa chupa ho. It becomes a complete offering if you offer that for the 3 jewels. So derak chupe tsena. So when you offer that, kinchuk sum gangarong la chungwashik chekyang jebu pakta mepa jungwe sampani drokte. So it's saying if you have this correct mindset, then even if you make a very small offering at any of the 3 jewels, the result will be paktumepa, so beyond thought, really, or beyond measure, right? Immeasurable. It's not seme like the immeasurables, but it's the same idea. Can't be measured. So the six attitudes you want to have. So yonegi shing gona mepa yenam yampatang. So you think there is no higher field of merit than this, field of qualities. Yeah. Right. So again, it's encouraged also when you offer to your teacher. If you think, oh, my teacher's great, but no one can really compare to the Buddha, then you don't get as much merit of the offering. I say get. I don't like to use that word, get merit, but that you don't accrue, or we could basically say you don't create as much merit as you would if you see the teacher as this is the highest. It's kind of the most positive way of thinking. Right? We talk about positive mental attitude these days. That's the idea, really. These people knew this, that if you think of things in that way, then that's the way the world will appear to you. Pure vision, right? And then pendok gona meido nyampatang. So then thinking there is no greater benefit than this, right? There's nothing more, there's no one who benefits me more than this, I think is the idea, right? So like in Chunju, right? Shenyang yome nyengir ching, pendok pat me zenamla, Shenzhen Leno Madopa, Shengang Shik, Shenzhen Guje Madopa, Shengang Shiki Lenlong Gyur. Right? So it's thinking about, this is in the chapter on patience, right? So it's that you don't want to get angry at sentient beings. One of the reasons it's giving is it upsets the Buddha, and the Buddha is your teacher. So you wouldn't want to upset your teacher. And so he's saying, furthermore, the one who unwaveringly has acted as a friend to me, as a nyen like a friend, nyen. And then penta paktu menamla is paktu zenamla, one who has benefited me in immeasurable ways. Semshin kuche madopa shenganjik lenlongir. How could I possibly repay the kindness other than by pleasing sentient beings, right? So we think about that. That's in the context of patience, right? But the idea here is that when you're making the offerings, that you think the Buddha has benefited me, or the three jewels really have benefited me so much. And then Semchen Tamjiki Choko Nyapatang. This is the supreme among sentient beings. Although really, if it's Sangye, Semchen Mayen, right? You know that. You've all been to Chura. So it's not actually a sentient being, the Buddha, according to the Rano. I think you may have already seen this, right? It's a bit strange. The Buddha is not a sentient. It says Sam Sangye Churchen, Semchen Yempertel, Semtan Dempe Churchen Makyao. Right? So he has a mind, he's sentient, but he's not a sentient being. It's just the way they use the term. But then he is a gangsa, right? As this person, right? But then the etymology of gangsak is one who's filled with afflictions and falls into samsara. So it actually, you think it should be the other way around, Semchen Yen Gangsak Mayan, but it's just the way that the tradition has used the words. You have the etymology on one hand, and then you have the actual boundaries of the term on the other. So anyway, so you could think Gangzak Tamjiki Chok, the best of persons, as opposed to the best of sentient beings, I suppose. And then Udambare Metoktar, Shindukyunu, right? So the Udambara flower is said to be the one that only sprouts when the Buddha comes in the world, once every aeon. So it's like that. The Buddha as rare as the Udambara, sort of by how do you say, by default, right? Because it's a tautology, that's the word. If the flower only comes into existence when the Buddha does, then it's a tautology that they're equally rare, right? And then Tong Sung Ki Tong Champo Jitiki Kamna, Chik Kona Jungwe Bashik Baho Yampatang. So you think that in the trichilicolism, that's the word, yeah? The 3,000, so it's not really 3,000 worlds, right? Tong Sum. It's 1,000 times 1,000 times 1,000. So it's a billion. It's 1,000 to the third power, yeah? Right, they say 3,000, but it means third power. So a billion large worlds, there's only one. There's only one Buddha, right? Like in Zu, right? Lenchik Nime Sangye Shin, right? Does not occur two at a time like the Buddha. Now that's understood to be the supreme emanation body, at least in the Mahayana understanding, right? You can have more than one Buddha in the world, but not one showing the aspect of being a Buddha, supreme emanation body. The Buddha shows himself as a Buddha. Someone like His Holiness the Dalai Lama does not explicitly show himself as a Buddha, although people might infer that. But of course, in the Hinayana understanding, there really is only one Buddha per aeon. Yeah. And then Jikten le de medegi ponsul sopatam jigi shiano. Right? And you think that among all the bases, right? The punso tamjiki. Oh, sorry. He's the basis for all of the great things, the punsok, the wonderful things, both of this world and beyond this world, meaning of Arya beings, right? So you think all those things and you make the offerings, right? So again, this is a lot of things to think about. So you can't just every time you make an offering think this, then they've already left. You can't make the offering, right? So the point is you train in this and you gradually just think this habitually. You don't have to make the effort, but you reflect on it again and again. So I have written this in the way that it comes from Jangsa, right? The Bodhisattva Bhumi by Asanga. So du Gyumparni Derak Chidik Chala. So yeah, continuously over time, you do any of those, right? So again, he's saying you don't have to have all of those thoughts, but at whatever time you can, you have which one you are able to have. Du song tan du chengi tsena. So in a du song, right, a special time, which really is like the 8th, 15th, and 30th of the month, literally, but could be any, like, and then whenever there's a auspicious lining up of the dates, right? That's why we have du song, right? The puja on the 15th and the 30th. So and or at a great time, like Duchen, right? It means like in Sakadawa or in Trunkor Duchen or in Trunkor Duchen, right? The birthday of the Buddha and the first turning of the wheel and so forth. Those are the Duchen, the great times. Rangi Nupatang Tumpe Chupa Zangwo Re Chao. So then at least as much as you can, you make offerings on those times. Right? Shenyang Satung Gyundu Cha Gupe. So then again, you should continuously offer your food and what you drink, because that's easy. Right? You're doing that anyway. So if you're mindful to always make offerings before you eat and drink, right? That is one of the precepts of refuge anyway. I used to do that. So Deitse Deraki Pugi Chupa Machaneyan. So that time, even if you don't have the most exquisite offering, so even with little hardship, you can accumulate a very large collection of merit, really. So even just water, you can offer, and imagining as the most exquisite requisite, and offer it from the bottom of your heart. Deong. So then this is quotation from Sharara, right, one of the Kadampa masters. Tugingosa. So tugingosa, I have a note, is moldy sweet cheese. Right? I would not know that otherwise. This is, again, I've said 12th century, early 10th century colloquial Tibetan. Does not exist anymore. So tugingosa. I guess ngo is like it's blue, so cheese gets moldy, right? And lo me sir. It's like so then yellowed leaves. Tabu ne mayingis. Don't offer those, he's saying. Don't offer your old things and worn out things. He said, Gang sawa ne chagol. What's the best of what you have? That's what you offer. Chai pu sunrela pua kugi kyang. Right, so even this the best of tea. Pua kugi kyang du sera jawa re mi hong. Right, so don't think of it. I think, yeah. So you're offering the best. The poo really, it's the best, but it means you offer the first portion, right? Because the first is the best. You offer what's the best piece, but don't think that you're just clearing away the dust, right? Like I'm getting rid of the bad parts of the food, and then I'll leave the rest for myself. That's not the idea here. So it says Shadarawa said that. Peras. So for example, and this is then from the sutra. Shingsa Shindu Shimpa Shigla. So in a very fertile field. Sabun depsu madapar. So, but you plant the seed when it's not the right time to plant, like out of season, right? Dupadrana detar jok mipopratar. So you wouldn't think to do that, right? You wouldn't dare to do that, it's saying. De chi delek tamche jongwei xing. Sa damba du tua du shi tamche du kyunche me par deleki sabon tape. So likewise, this di chi is this in future lives, right? The field that gives rise to all of the goodnesses and happiness of this and future lives, this excellent field, at all times, in all 4 seasons, it says, dushi, tamshiri gyunchi mepar. Without break, you should always be planting the seeds of goodness and happiness. So he's saying that's okay anytime, right? So you don't plant a seed at the wrong time, but in a field. But here, you can, any time of the year, you can make offerings. There's no wrong time. Chokpa, Deliang, Debe Shugi Sonam Gishing, Mipagur Chikche. Right, so then with your faith, then it will become an excellent field of merit, right? Dole Sumpatar, Chagyu Majungna, right? So he's saying if you're not able to do this, if you don't get the chance to do this, then you're very deprived, right? You have the opportunity and you don't take our advantage of it. Then so the praise of the praiseworthy one by Ashvagosha or Maitri Chitra. Right? They name different ways, but it's easier to say Ashvagosha. Kyutan drawe shingdakni jitin sumna machite. So there's no field similar to you in the 3 worlds. Kyuni jine negi namgi chok. So you are the supreme abode of giving, right? The place that which you give. Dretsang zepe sang mala. So dretsang is right row. So the pure row, it means a row of monks, right? Like dre, like dre in the puja. Yeah? He's the only one nodding. I guess he's the only one who knows. No, at the not rice. Drill. Karata dra la drill. It's a row, yeah. Like the rows in the put drill, yeah. You'll see it. So now they name the rows, all right. You see, at the dratsang they have names now on all the rows, like dong drill chemo, like the front row, the big front row, and the great front row, right, and then. Yeah, and then like so and so forth. So you don't get confused, I guess. So then zepet samala, right? So he makes you're the one that makes the row pure, right? You make a whole row of monks pure. Seems to be what it's saying. It's a praise of the Buddha, right? Namke taduk machipe chutang Shengdak Chitawa. I see. Kila mentang Shina Chitawa. Kila menta dogipe. Napamipa tukmachi. So the second part is saying, medicine or harm to you, but really the benefit or harm to you has no limit. Like the result is going to be huge. The result, the napamimpa, the ripened result. But it's saying like the yeah, so the chu, I think it might be a typo. Mao cha shepku chu. Right? It should be chu, just like water, but chu can also mean width and breadth. Right? Chu tang sheng. Right? So mao cha shepku chu, the lip. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Like the lip of the sky is limitless, doesn't really say much. I don't know what that means, but I think it's saying chu, just if you take out the mao, chu tang sheng, the breadth and depth of the sky is limitless. That makes a lot more sense. Right? Shezun Pataro. Shingi Chokla, Tamobul Shingi Tong Samyang, Mipadi. Right, so this supreme field, among ordinary fields, you don't see something like this, he's saying. Oko is us, right? So it's an ancient word for we. Uka tang sarwa midukpe konchok chupala du tam chidu chao. Right, so we're not going to find a better time than this. So we should always make effort to make offerings to the jewels. It's 3 jewels. It doesn't say 3. So detar chena shing dabala gets a trumpet tule. So then from the force of the roots of merit that you create, really, through offering to this excellent field, lam girinpa nam laloy to jigis drowe. So then the force of your mind to meditate on the stages of the path, right? So the rest of this text is all about meditating on the stages of the path, but he's saying you have to have the merit. It's important to remember that, right? We sometimes think we can just sit down and think about the Lam Rim and everything will fall into place if we just keep thinking about it, which you should keep thinking about it, but you need merit too. Otherwise, your mind won't budge. You'll get this when you debate Rik, right? In this the Chittamatra system, right? They believe that there's Rik Chepe Gansak. There's somebody who doesn't have Rik. Right. So then the Umapa rejects that. But the idea is that they say, well, some people, just as much as they make effort, just nothing happens. Their mind doesn't change. Right. The Umapa argues, well, eventually it will. It's just you have to look over many lifetimes. But their understanding of it anyway is that person just lacks the basis. So no matter how much effort you make. So here, no matter how much effort you make, eventually something will change, but you still need to accumulate merit. Otherwise, a lot of effort might not, if it doesn't have the merit support, won't have the fruit right away. So here he said, by making offerings to 3 jewels, that's how you accumulate merit. So this passage here is very commonly quoted. This nyana tsikmitsin samna domako gomna gyula makewe loi tu shindu chungwe dusu shingitula tempa mengak yino. Right, so that passage that I just read. So he says that's the oral instruction. So it's not him, it's not Tsongkhapa's making it up. But whether it was used with those exact words, I haven't seen, but it might have been. We have to see. I haven't studied the Tenrim, some of the previous texts of the Lam Rim, right? But this is often quoted teachings here. So, Nyanatsik misin. So you listen, but you don't retain the words. Samna don mako. You contemplate, but you don't understand. Gomna yumalamake. So when you meditate, nothing arises in your mind. You don't have realizations. So loitu shindu chungwe dusu. When your mind is so weak like that, that's the time shingi tula dempe mengak. That's the time when you should rely upon the force of the object, the field, right? So then your mind is not powerful enough, so you rely upon the external object or the holy object or just your teacher or something. So yeah, Lamas of Rinpoche would often talk about this point, right? The importance of holy objects and having that as a way of kind of making your mind fertile for planting seeds. So it's also advice, of course. The point is when you just find you're stuck in your meditation, then you can turn to accumulating merit. Tetaryang Pelden Makugi. So that's again, Maku is the translation of Matri Chitra, but it's also again Ashvagosha. It's the same person. It's just a different name. There's actually 3 different names, right? I think there's some debate as to whether they're the same person. We talked about this last year, because also Lopom Pao, right? Arya Shura, yeah. It's the same person, but I don't know. So he said. Nengak somla kilchen po, kyola tene dagi lo. I mean, I think it's the same praise as above, right? The danko ngak no ngaktu, the praise of the praiseworthy one. So nengak somla kilchen po, kyola tene dagi lo, yargi du su chubotar, chuang shindu power gyur. Yeah, power gyur. So, when I wanted to compose poetry, right? Then to the great Kel Chenpo, the fortunate one like you, I depended on you, and thereby my mind, like the river in the summertime, even though it was small, it overflowed. And so that by relying upon the Buddha, then his mind became increased the qualities by relying on the power of the object. Shezum Pataro. Chipa yang nibelama tokbar, rangi debala topayin sumpatar. Right, so the what it's not, tokpa here is like it doesn't rely upon, really, is the idea. It's not based on. The power of the offering is not so much what you're giving as much as the power of your faith. That's more important. Dipe yuna mandala tang chu tang lo masungwe chupa lasope ilusope kyang chupe chokpe sangzingmena derar cha. So if you have faith, then if mandala or water, right, making mandala offerings or making water bowl offerings in your room or something, and lo masumpe chupa are things that you, with your mind, offering things that you don't own, even if that is just perfectly fine, even if you don't have a lot of material requisites. But yona shingdu tomi nupar. But if you do have them, but you can't give them, right? Then it's like he's saying you're not able to give them, and then you quote the Bodhisattva Charyavatara. He's saying, so you say, "Tani sona mitren den mitren days churbinorshan dala chamichi." Right. So I am of little merit, and thereby I am poor. I have nothing else to offer. Right. So the point is, you have a lot of requisites, but then you don't offer them, saying, "Well, I am so poor of little merit, I can't offer anything." He's saying that's a mistake. Then it's like deceiving the three jewels, right? So Potawa Shilne, so as Potawa said, Tungpor Trimachen Shik Pupor Retapne Sanda Kapor Pugichu. Again, these the 11th century words, but it's a little more comprehensible here. So Tungpora, so like your porpa, right? Your bowl, porpa, we'd say together today. Trimachen, so a stained bowl, right? Filthy bowl. Shindu pang, so something that is like nothing that nobody wants. Bu re tapne. So you smear with like inferior incense is the idea. And then senden gabur pugi chu, and then you say, this is sandalwood and camphor. This is water scented with sandalwood and camphor, right? But you're just offering a stinky bowl. That's what he's saying. So she mulangi mikdenla gogor chepasung watang drao. It's like a blind person trying to deceive a sighted person, right? Because the Buddha can see more than you can, right? So you say to the Buddha, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I couldn't get anything better," right? He doesn't buy it. You could say. So Puchungwe Shelne. So as Puchungwa also said, right, another one of the Kadampas, Nge dambo porpor natsar tingewa pu. Right, so first he's saying when I didn't have much, then I just gave a very inferior offering. Tingewa. I think ting is like ting, right? These would be called ting, right? The bowls. So tingewa, I think, is the old term, but now it's just called ting. Tene ringbu shijor ngar singwa pu gyu jung. Then I was able to say a little better. Ringbu, I forget what that is. And then with the 4 applications, there's a lot of unusual objects he's talking about here, but it's something middling. And then nowadays I offer akoru and durushka. What is that, in Sanskrit? That's a Sanskrit word. Akoru, duruksha, lasope, sung. So then I offer such incense these days. Chingewa pu. Sung chingebu. I offer that. Anyway, what? Aloe vera. Aloe wood. Okay. I thought aloe was just a little cactus-like plant. I didn't know it had wood.
It gives also aguru, if that means something else.
I don't know. Anyway.
It's called just fragrant aloe. Yeah, fragrant aloe wood.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Anyway. The point is, now that I have better things, I offer better things, right?
It's supposed to be medicinal and incense.
Yeah, so that's the idea. Now he has the best incense because they're all incense that he's talking about. Right, so first you offered the cheap incense, and then you offer red crystal incense. So you can think of it that way, right? The high quality one. So some patar. Chopa chungo la niena, a niene, chopa chungo la niene, bapuna. So if you belittle a small offering and don't offer it, se rangpo dender shikl drola. Right, so for the rest of your life, it's going to be like that, I think is what he's saying. Chungrimne nendinkina. So if from the very beginning, yeah, because then if you start out that way, it's just going to continue that way. But even at the chungrim, at the beginning stages, if you practice where there's a lot of insistence, right, you really work hard at it. J sumdu droa, then it'll just increase and increase. Kongi chaklin taran lapte. Right, then he's saying that so you will be able to practice like Puchungwa did. He's saying you'll be able to do that like that. Kongi rechigla sersing nishutsanigi pupa pojake. So because he's saying it said that later in his life he was able to offer incense that was worth 22 gold coins. Right? So I guess so he was able to offer better and better incense as he accumulated more and more offerings, I suppose. Yochela wong tope sempa chepo namgi, right? So then great beings, right? Like bodhisattvas is the idea. Yeah, bodhisattvas who have power over requisites. Yochela wong topa, right? So you have that like in some of the bodhisattva grounds, like the 8th ground. Namke Dzu, the power, like Namke Dzu is the name of the bodhisattva, right? Namki Ningpo is another name for Namki Ningpo. Akashagarbha, right? But that's just, he's named that because he had that power. The point is that you can just spontaneously manifest lots of offerings. So bodhisattvas who can do that, they emanate hundreds of thousands of their bodies, and with 1,000 hands on each body. Xing Tamshi to journey, and they go to all the different fields. Gawanamla Kalpaduma Tripadzena, so that they go to all the different fields and make offerings to all the different Buddhas there, victors. Yundin Tarnang Chungse Re Chok Shepadak. So those who are Chokshe Re Shepadak, so those who are satisfied just with a few inferior counterfeit qualities. Right, people who think that I'm so great because I made these great offerings. I think that's the idea. But then they don't make offerings. That's what it's saying here. They say this: Koni de taboda janju mire she mawani chugu shindu chungwe cheljulo. Right. So they say, I couldn't get that power into power. I couldn't become enlightened by making offerings, I think is the idea. Right? So making offerings isn't going to bring me to enlightenment. Right? That shows a complete lack of familiarity with the Dharma, is what it's saying. Because he's saying if the great bodhisattvas, they act that way, then it's obviously beneficial. It's something that's beneficial on the path. Otherwise, they wouldn't do that. Chelchu, right? So it's nonsense to say that. Then a konchok trinlay. So then the Dharma, what is it? The Ratna Mega, right? That's the sutra. The cloud of jewels. Dode namle chupa tang rimjo chawagya chempo gangye padetabu ta nyamching. So as it's the offerings that are described in all of the sutras, and rimjo chawa, the service. So I was thinking. Last year, I insisted that rimdro, maybe we could say, is etiquette. But it really, I think service, we should say. It's a very hard word to translate, right? It can mean all kinds of different things. But I think maybe service or, it's like shabshi chua is the idea, and we say in colloquial, right? Shabshi. Well, it's not a person, right? But yeah, but shabshi, shabshi shua is like attendance. I mean, that means like you came to chura a lot, right? You good high attendance, right?
And to attend to.
Yeah.
Service.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, in Tibetan Shabshi Shua, it's like people use that. It just means like you offer yourself, your work, your time. That's kind of the idea here. Rimjo Chawa Kya Chempo Gangi Patetabu Da Nyen Ching. But I said it in different contexts, they can kind of mean different things. So you act according to the way, the ritual, that's the etiquette I was saying. Nianqing. So you do that. Nianqing Dedak. Ning Tapane Lakpe Sampa Choki. So with a sincere aspiration, right, from the bottom of your heart, then Sangit under Desempa Namla Ngoho. You've been dedicated through all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. She Sumpatara Chao. So you should do it as is said in the sutra. That was a quote from Sutra. So okay, that was the second benefit. That was very long. The benefit. The second advice, right, which is that you should remember the kindness of the three jewels and make offerings. Now we have the third thing, right? The third, you say precept of refuge. Ningte Jesu Trempe Drowa Shenyang Sudeda Buddha Kopani. So remembering them out of kindness, then you establish others in that refuge, right? You don't just keep it to yourself. You try to encourage others. You don't try to convert them, but you think how much this has benefited you, and if you can help others in accordance with their level to take some part in this. Semshin Shenyang Chinugi Kapsu Drowala Sewe Kopaho, right? So to other sentient beings, as much as you can, out of affection, you place them in going for refuge, right? You encourage them to go for refuge, or you teach them how, or whatever is in accordance with their capacity, right? It's not about forceful conversion. That's really not the point here. So Chawa Gang Chepa Tang Gopa Chi Yupana. Okay, so this is the fourth point here, right? So whatever activity you do, and whatever need you have, whenever you're having trouble with something, you need help. You do that by first making offerings to the three jewels, and so adopting and make requests. And you abandon other worldly methods. Now again, it doesn't mean you can't do anything else, right? Like again, the extreme would be you don't take medicine, because when you go for refuge, then you don't have to take, that'll be your refuge, your medicine. When I was in Shungning Zindra, right, that's the year I was living in the Kangsen, right? That's the year I read that book by about Ajahn Mun, right, the Thai monk, right? So maybe it wasn't the best year to read that book, although it was an excellent book, and I have to say, I don't mean, it's not criticism of the book by any means, it was exceptional. But the point is that Ajahn Mun, he actually encouraged his followers in Thailand in the 1930s or so. He had a lot of students, and he encouraged them not to go to hospitals and take medicine, just to meditate, right? And they would meditate out in very dangerous wilderness with tigers and things like that, right? So that's when I was living in the Kangsen and I had pneumonia, right? So I kept going to Chura, even though I had pneumonia. I didn't go to the doctor, but so that was a mistake. But I learned from my mistake. Fortunately, I survived, right? So you have to be reasonable, right? You have to see if it's available. And I think part of the idea there for him is it wasn't easily accessible, and probably in the 1930s in Thailand, I kind of suspect going to the doctor may have done more harm than good, right? So who knows? But you have to. So on the opposite example, I was in retreat this year, right, at Chelsea. Well, as soon as I got there, I started having some health problems actually, and I had a cyst that I've had for years suddenly got very big and was going to explode or something. It was quite painful. So but it was like the day after I set the boundary for the retreat, which was not to go into the town. So I decided I wouldn't do it, and I was able to get medicine sent up, and it was okay, right? But it was a few days where I was really not sure what was going to happen, right? So you have to judge the benefit versus the harm. But I think my point here is it doesn't mean you never rely upon any other worldly method, but you don't think of it as, you don't use it to supplant your refuge, right? You have to. It's a very subtle thing. It's not easy to say is this or that. You have to learn this through practice over time and experimentation. But we see this, I think, also. There's at the extreme sometimes in the monastery. I mean, not just in the monastery, but any kind of religious group, right? Where I mean, you do have mind training, right? So with mind training, you want to think whatever happens is okay, and I don't need to try to change the situation, right? There's a lot of training of that. If you've written the Bodhisattva Jayatara again and again, just I will accept, remain solid like a piece of wood, right? And the Tibetans are very good at that, I've found. And I say Tibetans, I mean monks in general, but especially the Tibetans, I'd have to say, because their culture very strongly. You notice a difference with the ones who came from Tibet in that regard, I think. It's not a racial thing so much, it's just about their culture training in this over hundreds of years. But then the opposite extreme is that you don't search for new ways to do things, right? Which for them oftentimes is kind of seen as a bit suspicious, as they were the word sardu, right? Sardu, like a new invention. That's what they say. They dismiss it. It's like when they give the lapcha in the Kangsen, they say people are doing this these days. Sardu, sardu. Like, no one used to do it that way, so why are we doing it that way these days, right? But I remember when one person died in the Kangsen, which many people have died in the Kangsen, but one monk from Geshe Namdak's class, right? So he was not that old. He was probably in his early 40s, I would guess. Right, and he died, and we went and burned the body in the field. And I asked how would he die. He said he just got sick, and then one night he died. I said, well, does anyone know what he got sick with? No. So you think if somebody just suddenly gets sick and dies, you'd want to do an autopsy and find out what did he have and how can we prevent this happening again, right? So that's the other extreme, is you don't take any measure to actually alleviate what could be suffering in the future. And that's in a lot of ways, I think, what has changed. This is getting a little bit of a different subject here, but it's actually very relevant, right? It's a very different thing about the modern world. I think in medieval Europe it was similar. The church was very oppressive, and any kind of new idea they would squash out, basically. Especially new ideas about what causes illness, things like that, right?
Well, also in the science field nowadays is the same.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's a totally different question. Is that science itself is becoming, has become perhaps that we'll talk. That's just that we can have that discussion separately. But yeah. So there's two extremes of it, right? But in general, I think that was a major way that they kind of broke out of that pattern in Europe, and then that spread to that way of thinking of innovation, right? So it's as I say, this is a very subtle and difficult question. It's not so easy that you just you have to follow it because it's in the book, right? So like I learned for myself, if I hadn't gotten to the doctor that year with pneumonia, I'd probably have died. So you have to sometimes you have to learn the hard way, right? So yeah, that being said, that as I say, it's not a side point really. It actually is right to the heart of what these are important topics here. So chawa dindershik chipatang gupa chindershik tongyang. So whatever thing you do, actually one last thing I'll say, actually, if you ever read the book Story of Tibet in the library, it's a really good book. It's a history of Tibet, but it's interspersed with interviews with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So it's what does His Holiness think about this period of time in Tibet, what was happening, right? And one of the times, some point in the book, I think it's early on when the author is interviewing His Holiness, he says, what do you think about Tibetans? And he praises them, but he says, but they had one fault, maybe there's not just one, but he says, but they had too much faith in Buddhism. He said, but it was the wrong kind of Buddhism. It was the wrong understanding. They thought about big statues and high lamas, and that's Buddhism, is that you revere these people. But he says that's why we lost the country, because people didn't. That's very obvious, actually, if you look at history. That 13th Dalai Lama urged them to modernize the country and to make a modern army, because if we don't, we're going to be overrun by the world powers. And nobody wanted to listen to that. And as soon as His Holiness passed away, then they dismantled all of the projects that he'd instituted. And within 20 years, then they lost the country, right? So that's Yeah, His Holiness is very practical about these things too, right? When he came to the Mind Life conference in 2015, that was how he opened the conference. Right? When he spoke in Tibetan, when he spoke to the foreigners, of course, he has a very different tone. When he speaks to Tibetans, it's often quite kind of very commanding, right? But he was saying, well, I think, I mean, he was, because it was a broad audience. It wasn't just Buddhists there, so he wasn't just talking about Buddha. But he says everybody is always trying, because this is a science conference, right? So it's everybody is always trying to pray to God and to solve all the problems in the world. Right? He says, well, I think when you die and you go up to heaven and you ask God, why didn't you solve the problems? He's going to say, you created the problems. You figure out, you solve them. Right? So what is the point then? Well, have I just dismissed it? Certainly not. I think, we have to, you have two extremes, right? And this is maybe the opposite extreme, is when you just think everything is up to me, and that we could say there's no wisdom greater than myself in the universe. It's just human ingenuity, which we have to rely on a lot, but also recognizing that there is maybe something greater that we can tap into, but we don't rely on it in a naive way. That's the big fault, perhaps. Or think that we're relying on it when we're really relying on our own delusion. That's also kind of the point. Right? So exactly, you go to the Buddha and you say, why didn't you help me? Well, I tried to help you, but you didn't help yourself. So how do I help you? Right. Konchok sumla tempatang, so then you rely on the jewels. Right? Terak tang jesu tumpe konchok chupa sok chahi. So he's saying you do offerings in accordance with the three jewels, but teratamitumpe bilmasupa. So you make offerings in accordance with the things that accord with the three jewels, but not things that don't, like bun is what it's saying. Now, nowadays, bun in Tibet is actually quite close to Buddhism, right? But I think the idea is just whatever, we don't have to use terms per se, but any kind of spiritual practice that is out of accordance with the teachings of the Buddha, right? That's harmful to others, or has a very discordant way of seeing things, or way of seeing the spiritual path. That's the idea here. So it's saying you can't. There's two ways you could read that. You should not rely upon it at all, or it's completely inappropriate to rely upon it. Or you could read it as it's inappropriate to rely upon it in all ways. So you could rely on it for something, but not everything. So that would make quite a distinction, but it's not actually entirely clear. Now, but tamshi du ten mi wrong way. Du tamshi du konchok la lo keller chao. So at all times, you should entrust your mind to the three jewels. I mean, that's the main point. But we don't think about the three jewels. It's like at all times, you ask something external to help you. The point is, we think about the three jewels. We talked about it as Alexander Berzin says, as safe direction, right? You think, what is the dharmic way of responding to the situation, right? What is, if the Buddha were here now, what advice might he give, rather than trying to just kind of surrender responsibility? That's not the point. You use your wisdom informed by the teachings of the Buddha. Okay. So next, that was the fourth. Now we have the fifth advice, or precept of refuge. Peyon shene nien len sum sen len sumdu kapsu droa chawala ni. Right. So knowing the benefits, then 3 times by day and 3 times by night, you go for refuge. We already talked about that, didn't we? So the first one, I just glanced at it quickly and said it was 3 times, but it says going for refuge again and again. Here it's 3 times by day, 3 times by night, so it's a little bit more specific. So that has 2. All right, the benefits. So it's saying you have to know the benefits. So what are the benefits? And then there's 2 ways to describe the benefits. One is in dua, right, by Papa Tokme. How do you say that? This, I forget the word in Sanskrit. Do you remember? Tenla Habadua. That's by Tokme. It's not a compendium of ascertainments in English. I don't know how you say it in Sanskrit. It probably is just in English in here. Yeah, it's just in compendium of determinations. It says here.
It's about a Sangha, is it?
Yeah, it's one of the Saimoji. Saidenga, the 5 texts on the grounds. Saidenga. Anyway, don't worry too much. It's just the compendium of ascertainments, we can say. So the way that the benefits are described there, and then the way that they're described in the oral tradition, right? That's the one that we usually talk about, like when you you might know more. Like if you have the Nurlam Sapcha that I talked about, that's what's in there. The outlines according to the Swift path. It's about the oral tradition, but here it presents both. So the first has 2 sets of 4. The dua. Shitsen dambo sonam gachewa topa. So the first is the first of the 4 in the first group is that you achieve great merit, right, by going for refuge. Chimen ngadre sungle. Chimen ngadre sungle, the deathless drumbeat. The Dharani of the deathless drumbeat. That's the name of the sutra. Sangye chomden sammikyap, tambe chokyang sammikyap, pape gendun sammikyap, the depan denamgi, nabimbahan sammikyap. That's a very commonly recited verse, right? The tea offering, they sometimes do that. His Holiness likes to recite this verse before the tea offering. Right? The qualities of the Buddha are inconceivable. Qualities of the Dharma are inconceivable. The qualities of the Holy Sangha are inconceivable. Through generating faith, the inconceivable, the common ripening result will also be inconceivable. Right, and then you add, may I be born in the pure realm. That's when you offer it. Chetang, Parchin Duwale, so then the compendium of the perfections. This is by Aryasura, right? It's the same person as Asragosha and Mahati Chitra, but they just name him something else. Kapsong sonam sungyo na kamdun samdundiang nuduchung. Right, so if the merit of the going to refuge were to take form, then even this 3 realms, right, the form, formless, and desire realm, would just be too small to contain it, too small of a container. Gatso chempo chui terpugi chewa shaminu, right? All the water in the ocean cannot be measured. Pugi chewa chuminu, with a pu. I guess just with a small instrument is the idea. Right, so trying to measure it in that way, it's incomparable. Sheisum pataro. And then gawa tang choktu gawa tupani. So this is the second one, that you gain bliss or joy and supreme joy. Right, so I think it's temporal and ultimate joy is the idea. So in Trempe Tsom, right, in the Udavaga, right, the Dhammapada they call it, the mindfulness chapter. Ganjik Ningtang Senam Su Sange Jesu Chen Che Ching Ganda Sange Kap Songwa Dera Mihin Yepa Yin. Right, so the one who day and night remembers the Buddha and goes to refuge with the Buddha, that one finds a human. I mean, I think the idea is that you find a human body. You're born as human, so that's the temporal joy is the idea, right? Or I guess you could interpret it as that they find the essence of the human life. But I think the point is that it will cause you to be born as a human in the future. So then you apply that also to the other 2, because it says the Sangye, right? The one who remembers the Buddha, so also the Dharma and the Sangha is the idea. Then the way cap sumla tende yubani, dagi niela lepernyedo nyamne. So you think, when you do that, you think, I found a great treasure. I found the great requisite. Gawa Jesu pelwa gyurwaho. Then your joy increases. Right? And then ting is in tang. Nampartapatupani. So then you gain concentration and then purity, which would probably mean that with your concentration, you meditate and abandon the afflictions. Ting is in there. Cheraki lape. Right, so you're liberated by the trainings in concentration and wisdom. Shitsen Nipe, so now we have the second group of 4. Sunwa Chempo Tan Dempani. So then you have great protection. Chepa Gyoro, he says, I'll explain below. Right? Now it's interesting. It's sort of what I was saying before. Similar topic, right? So you think, well, if I go for refuge, then I'm protected. Right? Well, actually, when you look below, he says, what does it mean to be protected? It's that because everything that happens, you remember the teachings of the Buddha and you practice them. So that's your protection. Right? Right? It's not that we go for refuge. Like I sometimes say, people say, like, people might hear of people who were great practitioners, but then some calamity befell them. That happens. And I remember somebody saying, but how can that happen when they're such a great practitioner? So sometimes I say, well, the Buddha taught the method to be free of the suffering associated with birth, old age, sickness, and death. He didn't teach the way not to get sick or not to die. That's not the point, right? Ultimately, if you're not reborn in a human body, you won't die, or at least you're not reborn in a contaminated aggregates, right? But to think that in the meantime, because I practiced, then I'm going to be protected, well, maybe. You can hope, but it's not always reliable. All right. I mean, I remember also we were arguing with one, I won't mention the person's name because it's not nice, but there's an arguing isn't the right word, but they were saying this person is, I consider a teacher, was saying, that one of the benefits, I think we were saying, because there's a lot of snakes around here, right? To be careful, and they're saying, don't worry, a snake won't bite a monk, right? So I pointed out, well, I was just reading recently in some of the stories of the Buddha's disciples that the brother of Shariputra died of snake bite. And he said, well, he probably wasn't a great practitioner, was he? I said, well, actually, he was an arhat in the book. I didn't say it that way, but that was, so you see this even in the story of the Buddha's life, or in the Buddha's life, of course, Moggallana himself, not Shariputra, but the other main disciple, he was murdered by bandits, right? And it says very explicitly that was because of his past negative karma, right? It just happened to ripen. It was so strong, it had to ripen that way. So you never know. It's not a guarantee. That's not the reason we go for refuge. But at the same time, we think that it will help things it's the best we can do, right? We can't prevent our karma. If we have very strong karma, there's no better way to prevent it from ripening in a harmful way than to go for refuge. But it doesn't mean 100%. What it will prevent eventually is circling in samsara perpetually. So we might, in the meantime, have some kind of calamity befall us, but that's okay. Might not be so nice, and I wouldn't say it was okay if it happened to me, but in the long run, it's going to be okay if you continue to go for refuge. It happens in future lives; you'll be born somewhere else and keep practicing. So we'd have to take a very long view, right? So that's interesting, right? He says, I'm going to explain this below, but then when he explains it, he quotes this. We'll get to the next page, but he quotes Psalm, right? Again, the Dhammapada, the Uddha Varga. Sipe sungu choche lam ngini kichak nam laten deshin shekpa tompate kichak namgi chagoso. Right. So the path that removes the splinter of existence, right? Like the splinter, meaning something that causes you pain. I teach it to you. I taught you. It's up to you to practice it. Right. So he says that's how it protects you. So he taught it. We have the protection. We can practice it. Right. Again, I'm not dismissing the possibility, and I think very real possibility that there is some protection. There are things that happen that we don't see that certainly there's benefit in that, but it's not the purpose, and then it's not something we should just rely on naively, really. And that sometimes we hear this, people say, like I asked somebody doing something that seemed to me rather dangerous and unnecessary, and they said, well, I feel very protected because I have my teacher. Well, okay. But, you could also take precautions. It's also probably a good idea, right? So, lopor mupe dripa tamche So so it's saying now, this is the second benefit. All of your obscurations of wrong mipa, like wrong mipa is so hard to translate, right? But like mipa or aspiration, inclination, right? So you're going in the wrong direction is the idea. That creates obscurations for you, or those are obscurations. They will also become more thin, right? They will gradually wane. Sapatang, yonsu sepa. So first they will get thinner, then they will exhaust. And yonsu tukpa, and then they will just get to rock bottom. It's basically saying they will hit the bottom, so they'll be gone. Topani, so that's what you get. Timpatang, chitang, trok, so you could have, the point here is saying, okay, that's the benefit. Now he's explaining it. So it's saying, it's when you have faith or inclination towards wrong teachers, wrong dharma, wrong friends, right? The opposite of the three jewels. Kapsu sunwe wangi. So then the force of going to refuge to them, laying up a sakpanam, so all the bad karma that you accumulated through that, chungu, it'll get small, it'll get less. The dakpa gyoro, it'll get purified. So then also you will become a worthy person, or a dampa, an excellent person. Kebu dampa namgi nangdu chamwag. You will be counted among kebu dampa, among excellent people. This is a good passage to have. If you ever, you should remember this if you debate. When you get to Shung Sarpa, right? Kebu dampa. At the beginning of Shung Sarpa, right? Because it said that Jetsun Jamgo and Maitreya at the beginning of Abhisamaya Alamkara, he praises, and the purpose is to show that he is according with the behavior of excellent people, right? And then there's this whole debate about, well, how could he do that if he's a Buddha, and why would a Buddha do that, and this and that. And that's the whole debate near the beginning of Shung Sarpa, in the 4th year of the program, right? But anyway, the point is, it says Kebu Dampa. And everyone's wondering, what is a Kebu Dampa? How do you define it? Because it's very critical to the debate. So here is the definition right here. I have it highlighted because you want to have that. It's Kebu Dampa means somebody who's gone for refuge. That's the idea, right? Excellent being. In this context, that's what it's talking about. So Tumpa Tang, Sampa Sumpa Chupa Tang. Okay, so then the 4th benefit, Tempa Lagawe La Namgi. So all the gods who delight in the Buddha, in those who are practicing celibacy and in the teachings. It's the Sampar Sumpa Chopa. Right? It means that your friend, usually means your companions in the celibate life, right? Sampar Tsumpa, those similar. But here it's saying the gods who delight in that. Yidu Ongshing, their minds will be inclined towards you. They'll want to protect you or be around you. Dawara Girwani, and they'll be delighted by what you're doing. Kibur Dampa Chuching, so you'll be counted among Kibur Dampa, among worthy beings, excellent beings. Tompa Lasopa Giboho, and you'll please the Buddha and so forth, other people, other excellent people. Lanam Jitar Gawani, so how is it the gods are delighted, he's asking? Che Kemoshi, Dakcha Kapsu Droa, Gangtang Gang Dempe, Deni Shipo Ne, Dir Kewe, Kabdroa Tandenching, Lemong du Nepa Na, Deni Dakcha Ki Droksu Giro Hongo, Nyam Ne Yigashing. So he's saying, whatever person, Che Komo is like so and so, whatever person, Dakcha Kapsu Songwa Gangtang Dempe, Dene Shipo Ne, Dir Kepe, Kapsu Droa Tang. Denjing, Lemondu Nepena. I think it's saying that, yeah, if we help, if that person who goes to refuge, when they die, they'll be born here, I guess, among the gods. That person, they need Dakchaki jokes to give away. So they said the gods say we'll help that person. Then they're very delighted. And Chedu Jopa, and they praise the person. Chedu Jope, Chedu Jopa ho. It's not totally clear. Let me look in the in the translation here. This person named such and such, who like us has gone for refuge, will die and be reborn here among us, right, among the gods. Because she or she has gone for refuge and become stable in it, he or she will be our companion. I see. So I just misread one phrase when it says Jok Sugirwa. It seemed a little odd to say this way, but I see. So Jok Sugirwa doesn't mean we're going to help them. It means the gods are delighted because they know this person who's practicing is going to be reborn among them. So he's going to be our companion in the future. So we delight, oh, someone's coming to heaven. So we're looking forward to seeing him. And they praise it that way. That's what it means by it delights the gods. Okay, so that's the way that it's described in the Compendium of Ascertainments. And now the way that it's described in the oral tradition. Mengakle Jungwe Penyon Lagele has 8 points. Nabasangi Berchupa, so you're counted as a Buddhist. Right? This is the ones that you'll more commonly see. I said these 8. Right, so that's what makes you a Buddhist. That's the distinction. That's, again, this is useful when you debate, when you go to Kyabsum in the Shungninpa. Right? What is it? What is the Nampa Sangi Temple the Jupe go? What is the door of entering Buddhism? What is the door of entering the Buddhist teachings? You have all these different distinctions. So here it's that you've gone for refuge. Actually, even next year, for him this year in Drupda, right? You have the definition of what is a Buddhist, and then a Buddhist, a Sangi Gijutta, Mampasangi Vijutta Mawegansaka, one espousing Buddhist tenets is a little different. Right? So you have to, that's one of the major debates at the beginning of Drupda. Yeah. Napasangi Batrupani, so you're counted among Buddhists. Chir Chinala Joksu Mandunane. So generally speaking, there's many ways to distinguish or deposit whether somebody is a Buddhist or a non-Buddhist. But Joje, right, Atisha, and Shantipa, they said Kabdro Chepar Jakpe. It's renowned, it's known that they considered it to be based upon whether or not you go for refuge. That's how they distinguished it. Kabdro Topne Matamwala Chao. So somebody who has gone for refuge and not abandoned their refuge. So I have a note here. Does that mean a person who abandons their refuge is now a Chirulpa? Maybe so. I don't know. I'll answer my own question. I wrote the question probably 15 years ago. So I guess, yeah, that's again just a debate point, right? Because he's saying what makes them a Buddhist, a Chirulpa, a non-Buddhist. So you abandon your refuge, you're a non-Buddhist, I suppose so. But actually, you could debate that because in the Vinaya, there's one of the lagma, right? The remainder downfalls for a nun is konchok tama. You give up your refuge, right? And so, and you might ask, well, why is it for a nun and not for a monk? It's just about the origin story usually, right? So there was most of the nuns, you'll learn, most of the downfalls for nuns. The reason they have 364 as opposed to 253 like the Gelongs. It's mostly because of one person, Bomgamo, or Stulananda. Yeah, she didn't behave very well. She did all kinds of things. It's kind of funny. It's like reading the nuns. And funny, I shouldn't say it's kind of funny, but reading the nuns Vinaya, it's just this story after story of all these mishaps of many of one person. She was, it seems like, you try to picture what kind of person she was. It seems like she was very mentally unstable, given the way that she behaved in a lot of situations. They give quotations of her speech and so forth, right? It's kind of interesting. You see, the people are like this all the time. It's not any different at the time of the Buddha. So at one point she was saying, I'm no longer a Buddhist. I no longer take refuge. And they said, don't say that, sister. And she, no. So then that became the fault for the nun, that you don't, or lakma, it's a very serious fault, that you repudiate your refuge. But then the question is, well, then, but don't you lose your monastic vows from the root? Because if you no longer believe in the Buddha, in the 3 jewels, you lose your vows. So it shouldn't just be that it's a major fault. It shouldn't be even talked about because you're no longer a monastic. So there's a lot of debate there about how that works. It's actually a relevant question, right? This happens. I think one of the solutions is that it's like specific. You repudiate specific refuges as opposed to in general. But I can't remember. The thing is, we didn't debate the nuns Vinaya that in depth, unfortunately. Right? We spent a lot more time on on the monks Vinaya naturally, but it's an interesting story and it's an interesting question, right? I can't remember. I actually I don't know. I don't think I even know if she ever became an arhat, right? Because like in the monks Vinaya, Shtula Nanda, you have Charka, right? What's it? Udayan, right? He wasn't quite as misbehaving as Bomgomo, as Stulananda, because although many of the vows are based on him, it's not the vast majority. Whereas in the nuns, it really is like it's just rule after rule. Bomgomo was staying here, and she did this, right? So, but anyway, he was there to the counterpoint in terms of being a very monk who misbehaved a lot. But he did become an arhat eventually. He eventually reformed himself, and then practiced and became an arhat. And he always had a lot of faith in the Buddha, right? I think part of the thing is that he was always very remorseful. He was just kind of a rough character, and he didn't know. The Buddha would say, "Don't do that." Oh, okay, I won't do that. But then it's something else. Oh, he didn't know. He just had to get the point after a while. But then, of course, even when he died, it was based on doing something that later they made a rule out of it. Right? Even though he was an arhat, people or hearts can still make mistakes. It wasn't for the bad motivation, right? But he was. The story is he was asked for advice by a woman who was a married woman, but she was having an affair with a bandit king, like the head of a bandit ring. And she asked him for advice, and he said, "Oh, that's sexual misconduct. You're married, and you really better not to do that." So she actually, I don't think she liked the advice, so she went and told her what do you say, mistress? What's the opposite of a mistress for a man? Yeah, I guess you love her lover. The bandit, Udayan said this, so he came and cut his head off. So that was the end of him. But he was an arhat, so that was maybe not so bad. But then the Buddha made the rule. In that case, don't go into town without informing anyone, right? Because he was just out. He was pretty roughly independent person, so he was just wandering around, and nobody knew where he was. And then they found out when the next morning he didn't come back. So he says he always had to have somebody accountable. Anyway, that was a bit of an excursion, or say a discourse. What's the word? Diversion. But hopefully it's helpful to understand these things. Nothing is so simple or straightforward, right? Then Tomar Sangye Bachupala. So then first to be considered a Buddhist, right? Konchok Sumas Ning Tapane. So you go for refuge from the bottom of your heart. Tompala Supa Zingogi. You need to adhere to the Buddha like that. De Mena, if you don't have that, Gewagang Chekyang Sangye Pramichudo, right? So then whatever, if you don't have that really sincere, heartfelt adherence to the Buddha and so forth, right, to the three refuges, then whatever virtue you do will not be considered a Buddhist virtue, right? You won't be considered a Buddhist, even though you're a very virtuous person. Okay, so then that's the first, right? The first benefit was that you're considered a Buddhist. Next is that you've now have the foundation of all vows, right? Really restraints, right? I always say vow is not the correct translation, but it's how people know it. The restraints that the vows you can take. So it says in Zujel, right, the commentary on Abhidhamma Kosha by Vasubandhu, Kapsudroa namni domba yanda palama tamchila gord it becomes, so those who go for refuge, it becomes the door for taking all of the vows. And then Kapsunchupale, so then the 70 stanzas on refuge by Chanchakirti. Genyan sumla kabdrowa deni domsun domge sawayin. So he said, yeah, Genyan. I think he's maybe speaking to a Genyan is the idea, like lay follower who goes for refuge to the three jewels. That is the root of the 8 vows, right? So the 8 vows. Anyone can list them? 8 kinds of pratimoksha vows. No. The 8 levels. So like Gelong is one. Yeah.
The two monks.
So you have to say Gelong, Gelongma,
Geloma, Getsu, Getsuma.
Getsu, Getsuma.
I don't know if it counts.
No, that's not a vow. Yeah.
It's not a vow, right?
Mm.
Geni,
Yeah, Genyan. Genyan Ma. Right. So Upashika, Upashika.
So there is two more now.
There's this. That's six. Yeah. So you got two more. Yeah.
Okay. The for the day vows.
Yeah. 1 day vows. Yeah. Yeah. The other one might be harder. Galopma. Right. And a probationary nun. Right. How do you say it in Sanskrit? I forget. Yeah, I can't remember. But anyway, so yeah, for a monk, you have novice and full ordination, right? For a nun, you actually have 3 stages. You have novice, probationary, full ordination, right? Yeah, there was a mistake actually I noticed in the footnote here, right? They listed as the male and female lay 1 day followers, and they don't list the probationary nun, but that's not correct. There's no distinction. It says for the 1 day because it's a minor vow, just 1 day, so they don't make a distinction male or female. Because like when you're taking the vow, you say, "Please hold me until I die," as a male lay follower, as a female lay follower. But when you take for 1 day, you don't say, "Hold me for 1 day," as a male 1 day or 1 day vow person, right? It's just a nyene, right? Abiding closely, nyene. But anyway, that's the 8. So he's saying when you go for refuge, that's the basis, right? So that's what it's saying. I said about the giving up your refuge. If you give up your refuge, you lose your pratimoksha vow. That's one of the causes, right? It's in Due Getso Ningpo by Tsongkhapa. He lists the causes of losing your vow, right? So, don't patongwai gyula ni lapa pong tang li shipo tang seni junda lensum gyur geta chenon tumong. So there's 2 causes of giving up your vow. There's that means the common and the uncommon. So the common, meaning it's common to all the 8 vows, right? Lapa pong is you offer them back. You offer back the training. And shipotang, you die. When you die, you no longer have your pratimoksha vow, right? Which is different than your bodhisattva vow. Lapa pong dan shipotang seni jung. It's a bit, these might not be so politically correct these days, but that's when you gain 2 organs, right? You have a male and female sexual organ at the same time. I don't know if that can happen spontaneously. Maybe we could say in a surprising or maybe even embarrassingly large part of the Vinaya is devoted to what happens. What do you do when that happens? We debated that a bit, right? Spontaneous sex change, but I don't know if that ever happened. There's a story of it in the sutra, so I don't know. Maybe in ancient times, I don't know if it even happens these days. I'm not medically proficient in this. Well, like in the sutra, there's a story. I mean, I don't want to get too sidetracked, but there's a story. If you read that story of Mahakachana, one of the Buddha's disciples, and there was somebody who saw Mahakachana, and he was a man, and he looked at Mahakachana, who was coming down from the mountain, who was a very attractive monk. He says, "Wow, I'd love to be his wife." And then he changed into a woman. This is in the sutra. Yeah. So then he ran into the forest. But then after some days, he changed back to a man and he came back. So I don't know. I'm rather skeptical of it, but it's in so many of the sutra stories and in the Vinaya. They must be talking about something. I'm not sure what they're talking about. Yeah.
Of course, there's no way to verify this, but I had an acquaintance who she was like anyway security guard and doing these kind of things. She said she was a boy until she was 6, and then she became a girl, and she's like.
Well, I mean, people who have transgender, where they have a sense of themselves, but it was actually, I don't know. My classmate even said to me, "Oh yeah, I knew somebody back in Tibet." I don't know. I mean, maybe, yeah, that's what I'm saying. If somebody knows about it, it would be useful to know because it actually is in the Vinaya, and he's saying it right here, right? So that's one, is if you but if you're halfway, right, you have 2 organs. Or if you change sex 3 times, then sum gyur, right? So 2 is okay. So that's what in the Vinaya, there's a lot of talk about when you're a monk, but you change, then you're a nun. So how do you manage that, right? So if you do it once, it's okay. Anyway, that's a sidetrack, but the point is here, what is the ways of losing your vows, right? So those I said, I hesitated to even bring it up because it's a bit of a contentious point. But then the last one, Geta Chenam, is you cut your roots of virtue, and that means that you develop either the view that there is no three jewels, there is no Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, there's no enlightenment, or the view that there is no past and future lives and karma, which that is a hard one because some people say, well, some people are questioning this, right? So that's an important point. What is that? We have to. That's a discussion maybe for a different time. But I also have some opinions on that about how we have to be more, careful about how exactly we define that. But the point really is, you decide that my actions have no effect. So what's the point of practicing as a monastic? There's not going to be a result of this in the future for me, whether you even consider it a future life or this life. But the idea is there's no connection between past and future actions, past actions and future experience, right? So that's the tumowa, and then the tuma mayimpa, the ones that are specific. Anyway, I think this is too much of a sidetrack, but the point here, the reason we brought this up is I was saying that going for refuge is the basis, it's the root of it, it's saying. So if you lose that basis, you no longer have the vow. So that you have to first go for refuge to take the vow. That's why when you take the Getsul, or really the Ganyan vow, right, you first go for refuge. When you take the lay vow, there's actually two parts of the ceremony. You take refuge, and then you take the precepts, right? And then when you take Gelong vow, there's not that, right? It's assumed, but it's said it's implicit that you're going with it for refuge. But since you already have gone for refuge, then you don't explicitly go for refuge in the ceremony. Kyabjun Yangdegi Sampa Temper Ching. So he's saying if you have the thought with refuge, then you have a stable thought of nirvana, right, of renunciation. Dele dompa kewala gongso. So he's saying this is interesting, right? So he's saying, what does it mean that it's the root? He's saying because with refuge you'll have stable wish for liberation, and he's saying that's the intention. That's the meaning of saying that it's the basis for generating vows. That's a major debate in the Vinaya, which is very relevant, right? The one about the man and woman, I say maybe we spend too much time on it, but this one we spend a lot of time on for a good reason. It's saying, do you get monastic vows if you do not take them with the motivation of wanting to achieve liberation? Right? There's different opinions on that, right? Because that's quite relevant. Then people ask and they say, well, I took refuge. Some of my classmates, they say, I took novice vows when I was 10 years old. I didn't even know what liberation was. Did I get vows, right? So they give some citations from the sutra, right? Like Charka himself, a Dayan, it says that he just went for refuge. He became a monk basically because he was going with the crowd, right? The Buddha came back to his homeland a couple of astu because he knew the Buddha before, right? He was a Shakya. He was the general, actually, of the Shakyas. And everyone was so amazed by the Buddha, and he's like, "Yeah, great! I'm going to go too, and I'm going to ordain also," right? But he didn't really understand the teaching, right? Obviously, as you see through his behavior, and then like the other people the young boys that the Buddha, the Ananda gave them food, and they wanted to ordain because the Buddha, the Sangha would support them and so forth, which is why maybe a lot of young boys ordain. So anyway, so Kunken Sonawa, the text that we study mainly, right? He says that you do get it says it's not Kabdro Dompa, it's not refuge. It's not Ngejugi Dompa, it's not renunciation vows, right? But it's still mere vows, and then later when you get renunciation, then you get the actual vow. Right, then there's a lot of debate. So you didn't have the vow before. So if you committed defeat in the meantime, later you get renunciation, then you didn't have the vow when you committed the defeat. So maybe you didn't have a defeat. Right, there's a lot of questions that come up. But then the first Dalai Lama, Gyalwa Gendendrup, right, Rinchen Trengwa, he has another commentary on Vinaya, which we didn't study directly. We read it on the side. We'll study it starting next year, actually. In Larampa, we start studying it. But he says you don't. He says you cannot gain refuge without renunciation. It doesn't mean you have to have spontaneous renunciation, uncontrived, right? That would be basically way too high of a measure. But you have to have the intention, I want to achieve liberation. You have to understand why you're taking refuge, or why you're taking the vow, right? It doesn't mean like literally at the time. Like some people say, oh, you have to know. That's a mistake, really. If in the refuge ceremony or in the monastic ceremony, you don't hear what they're saying and you fall asleep even, you still get the vow, because you came with that intention. The vow, especially for a gelong, it comes from the sojile, the action of the sangha. It's like they're determining. They ask, this person is an aspirant for a gelong, for full ordination. If anyone objects, please speak up. If they're silent, we'll take that as that you agree. And so everyone agrees. So that's what makes you a monastic. So it's not actually what you recite. So as long as you come with that motivation, so it's the causal motivation, then whether you hear the ritual or not, it's better to pay attention and know what's going on. But it's not that you don't get the vow that way. The question is, what motivation did you have for coming there, for wanting to be involved in the ritual in the first place? It was hard, of course. I mean, when I don't want to use the name, although you'll know who I'm talking about, when my young boy ordained, right? I mean, I tried to explain to him, but it's still clear to me he's developing, right? I can't talk to him about what liberation is. How do I describe it? He doesn't speak English. His Tibetan is very good, but he doesn't understand any Dharma terms, right? He speaks very fluent colloquially. So how do I even explain this concept, right? But you feel that there's at least in his case, I feel there's something kind of natural about it, right? But for a lot of the boys, I wonder. I mean, has much more of a than a natural inclination than a lot of them. But yeah, what do you say? Is it not? Do you not get monastic vows? Then if you don't, then it means that when you're older, you never had them to begin with. So I think that's a bit too strict. But it's a important question.
I was thinking, someone that gets vows
very
early in their life.
Yeah.
So they probably have been monk many lifetimes, right? If they get the vow so early and without effort, without even having the desire to become monk, they already become monks. So they probably many lifetimes they already with renunciation they chose many times to become monks. So that maybe is a valid reasons.
It's interesting.
Life,
I mean,
he's not conscious yet.
But it's not conscious yet.
Of his actual renunciation, but his potential is there because he already done with many kind.
Well, I think so. In his case, I get that sense, honestly. The fact that he had that inclination, coming from a background that did not support it, is quite extraordinary, right? And talking to him about why he chose to come here. So yeah, in some cases, and that's actually the solution or actually the argument that the first Dalai Lama makes, right? He says, no, in the case of Udayan, right? He had renunciation. He had to have renunciation. He became an arhat in that life. He had to have been practicing in previous lifetimes. So the idea is maybe you could say that it was there even though it wasn't formed. So you could say, well, why did not everyone goes with the crowd, right? Why did he think, oh, I'd love to do that. Everyone's doing it. I'll do it too. Something inside of him was just spontaneously responding to it, right? So there's that. But I don't know if that's the case. No, like you said, they choose. But in a lot of cases, is it really choice, right? A lot of the young ones who ordain, not just here, but in many Buddhist countries, it's because their parents set them here or because it's a good place to get an education.
They chose before, like in other lives, they probably, when they became monks in other lives, probably it didn't happen so easily that you're already born there without like a child.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that there's you could almost say it like fate, but the idea is that what drew them here, what karma brought them here. So it's hard to say. But it's, since we can't see that, we have to have some criteria, like how do we decide whether the ordination ceremony is valid or not, right? That's why it said that the vows are non-revealing form. You can't really know if somebody has vows, because only they can know from their side what their real intention is, right? Anyway, that's, yeah, we already are kind of having a discussion, but I was going to say we should stop, but we can have question and answer. But we also can check, do we have a way to have the people online? Can they send questions? Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, Gemma said again. Lecture said that they can be sent to the WhatsApp.
Yeah. So yeah, I think you all know that. If they, I don't know who's there. I can't see.
They asked
But-
a question before we didn't.
Okay.
Page, okay.
Ask a question.
I guess, okay, this.
Okay, so Ani Tenzin-Seki asked, are Getsu vows non-associate compositional factors or are they form?
Yeah. Well, in the Prasangika system, which is what we follow, they're form. Yeah. So you have the four schools, Tibetan Buddhism, right? So not Tibetan Buddhism, sorry, of the tenets. So the Vaibhashika based on Zu, right? Which is, I mean, Zu, Abhidhamma Kosha is based on the Vaibhashika system. I shouldn't say Zu, it's not the other way around, but so the Vaibhashikas in India, they had the idea of this non-revealing form that I just mentioned. That when you non-revealing form, it's a bit of a complicated point, but really the idea is that if somebody is not killing, that is form, right? Their lack of the non-action is itself a kind of form. But you don't know why they're not killing. You don't know their intention for not doing that. So it does not reveal their motivation. But that restraint, there is a restraint. What is there if they have a vow, or vow means restraint, right? Dompa. That restraint is the vow, that physical restraint of themselves. So because the Pratimoksha vows are restraint of physical things, of form, of bodily and verbal actions. You can't break your Pratimoksha vows with your mind. Right? So I said you can give up your refuge, but that's not breaking your vow. It's just that you no longer have the basis for the vow. So, yeah, in that system, it's form. And then the Sautantrika and the Chittamatra, and then the Savatantrika Madhyamaka, they all agree that it's the mental factor of intention. Right? So it's not, even then, it's not a non-associated compositional factor. It's a mental factor. Right? It's mind. Semjung Sempa, they say. But then the Prasangika, basically, I asked my teacher again, Tabge, about this, because we usually say, well, the Prasangika accepts that it's form also, but where do you see that in the texts? It doesn't. I've never seen a Prasangika text that specifically says the vows are form. So why? But except that in the Lam Rim Chemo it says that. So we assume that he's basing it on the Prasangika. But the understanding is that if we look at Chandrakirti, he mainly followed Abhidhamma Kosha for the conventional truth. He rejected some points of it, but the reason he's rejecting it is to show, I mean, not to show, but it indicates that he is taking that as authoritative, and only in certain cases where it contradicts the philosophy of emptiness does he deny it. But in general, he takes that as his basis rather than, I mean, rather than the Abhidhamma Samuchaya, right? By Sangha, those are the upper and lower Abhidharmas. Right, so it says, that's again in the Due Getsu Ningpo, the text I mentioned before by Tsongkhapa, right? He says, Ngejun sampa gyuche ne, shenu shedan chepa le, pongwe sampa gyunchapa, Ngejun sampa tanche ne, shenu shedan gyupa le, pongwe sampa gyunchapa, sabun chanche yino she, rangi de me gongok ma. So he's saying on the basis of Ngejung Sampa, right, of renunciations, you have to have that. That's also the point here. You have to have that as the basis. We debated that before. Shenu Shedan Chepale. So then turning away from harming others in the basis, which means the 10 non-virtues. Harming others is the 7 of my body and speech, and then the 3 are those of mind. Senishiran chepa le. Oh, sorry, I missed this line. Dopa degak lungak le. So then turning away from that, it is, so he's saying the vow is karma of body and speech, lungak le. Sukshayin che dupatang. So they say it is form. Pongwei sempa gyunchakpa sabon tanchi yinoshe. So the others say it is the mind of abandonment, which is it's a mental factor of intention, the mind to guard. Sambatun, and then along with its seed, sabon tanche yinoshe rangi demo gongok ma. So the higher and lower schools say that. It's saying based on the higher and lower Abhidharma. So the higher Abhidharma is the Abhidharma Samuchaya. The lower Abhidharma is the Abhidharma Kosha. So the Prasangika and the Babashika base it on that. And then the other schools base it on the Abhidharma Samuchaya. So yeah, a long answer to your question, but the answer then is that it's form in this system.
Then just very quickly, the Vinishchaya Samgrahani is the...
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, the compendium.
And what are the Che Sum?
Che Sum, how do you spell it?
Tau Payata Chada Che.
Oh, Che Sum. Is it in the text? Did we see that today? Or just in general? Chepa Sum, the 3 examinations.
Yes.
Actually, I was going to write an article about this just soon. As it has to do with the 3 kinds of phenomena. There's one way of classifying phenomena, ngongir, kogir, shindu kogir. Right, so manifest, hidden, very hidden phenomena. Right? So then you have the 3 ways of examining whether something is valid. That's chepa sum. So the first is, if it's a manifest, then you examine by direct perception.
Yes.
So it's not valid, actually, to do it any other way. Right? You shouldn't argue philosophically about something you can see right in front of you. There's the famous story in the this is in Europe about the medieval scholastic philosophers and how they would have these long philosophical discussions, and then they're arguing about horses' teeth. I forget what the point is, what they're arguing, but like, do horses have teeth or not, I think is the thing. And then they arguing, and then they come to the conclusion, logically it's proven they do not have teeth. And then the young boy brings in the horse. He says, look, there's teeth. No. Sorry. Right. So it's wrong to use philosophical reasoning to try to prove something that you can verify with your sense consciousness, right? You can still question, is the sense consciousness valid or not? That's a different point. But so you have that one, and then you have the second one is then things that are slightly hidden. So these are things that are not accessible by your sense consciousness, but are accessible by reason. Right? So the prime example of this is the Four Noble Truths. This is the standard example. The Four Noble Truths are not hidden, are not very hidden. They're only slightly hidden, which is an important point because that means karma is not very hidden either. To understand the Four Noble Truths, you have to understand karma. So it's something that you can use reason to access. And that's the second examination, is jepaksema, right? So inferential valid cognizer. And the third is very hidden phenomena. So you cannot access them with either direct perception or even with reasoning by the power of fact, right? You can't use normal reasoning. So an example of that, because sometimes people misunderstand this, it says karma. It's not karma in general. It's particular karmas. You could say, well, what action did I do in a past life that I now have this illness, right? That I now have pneumonia? That is very hard to know. You don't know the very specific things. Or the more important point is what will happen in the future. What will be the result of my action now? That's very hidden. It's very hard to predict the future. Is a very hidden phenomena. So that is only accessible through yichigi jepak, right? So an inference through the power of reliance on a valid source, basically.
Right?
Yeah. But then, so what is the chepa? What is the examination here? It's you have to examine the source, right? So you don't just rely on any source. You have to examine what is a valid source and see it. Does it contradict itself? Is the speaker valid? Things like that. So like, then the example is, well, the Buddha said this and you trust the Buddha. Now there's some point of debate here, though, and that's what I wanted to mention in this article I was thinking of writing. Because we had this as a major debate point a few years ago. It would appear potentially, because this is based on Dharmakirti primarily, it's no real certainty that Dharmakirti thought that this third kind of cognition was actually a valid cognizer, right? That's a big question, right? Because it is a bit of a jump to say, well, okay, not just that you can trust the Buddha, but that you have a valid cognizer, that you're 100% certain because the Buddha said it.
But wouldn't that be like that you could establish that by saying, okay, the Buddha has to have a namkyen, and then the Buddha has to have the compassion and the wisdom and the capacity to formulate it properly. So that's the reason why the Buddha would want to benefit much. Has the ability to benefit.
Yeah, that is the reasoning you use, that the Buddha is, you can establish the Buddha's omniscient, which is said to be something you can establish through normal reasoning. It's not something you have to rely on the text. That's a question, though. But also, then you know that the Buddha would not speak something, that not speak a lie because he's trying to benefit sentient beings. But then the question is, well, even so, there are many sutras that we say are not to be taken literally. There's the sutra where the Buddha says, if you pray to be born in Sukhavati, you'll be born in Sukhavati. We understand that is not literal. It was spoken to people who were feeling discouraged, and they would encourage them to think that way. With the thought, it's not a lie per se, but it's not that you're going to be born there right now. If you pray, it will create the causes over many lifetimes that will gradually unfold, and you'll go in that direction. So how can we verify that what the Buddha said somewhere else? Furthermore, and this is not something they say in the text, but I think is important, is how do we verify the Buddha actually said it just because we see it in a book, right? But the point I'm making is that in Dharmakirti's text, he does not say Jepaksema. And Tsongkhapa quotes that in Sercheng, in the Golden Garland, in the section on the Chirmidopedak in chapter 4. It becomes very relevant. So because because a few years ago I had to answer with my classmate at the Dratsang, right, for the Zhanggunchu Ngondra Damcha. And there were a bunch of people just debating all these word debates, right? It's what they like to do, which I found a little annoying because I'd prepared a lot, thinking more about meaning. But then one of Geshe Lexo's classmates, who's really thoughtful, really intelligent, good debater, he kind of broke through the crowd and he asked me, look, it says this in Dharmakirti and in Tsongkhapa. And I hadn't thought of that. I'd forgotten that they said that. And I was really interested in what he had to say because he was making a very good point, right? So anyway, yeah, that's it's a very important point in terms of how do we validate the teachings and how do we trust are they true or are they true is really the question, right? It's not that we take for a priori that they're true and then how do we establish it? It's we have to know how can we examine this in a meaningful way. So that's the Chepa Sum. I don't know if you saw that in Takrik. That's when you're going to get that this year, Takrik.
No, I saw that proofreading the 6th session audio book by Tradition Rinpoche that is being reprinted. The Lula translated in footnote 44 had this mistaken footnote that said that the Chepa Sum means like cutting, rubbing, and heating gold.
Well, yeah, that's the analogy, right? Yalong dakam kenam ki sekche dawach sershindu lepradala ngai ka lanwachai guchirmin, right? So the Buddha says gelongs, monks and scholars, like practitioners, addressing them, or they might, such a person, they might, in the way that a goldsmith would cut, rub, and burn gold, in the same way you should adopt my teachings, not merely out of respect for me. Right? And that's understood to be talking about the three levels, the cutting, burning, rubbing. So 3 ways you test gold. Those are the 3 ways that you would analyze the teachings. So the Buddha's saying you should do that. You should do that with my teachings. You shouldn't just take it on, that's what I say. What you said, the six session guru yoga, or you meant something else.
Nonsense.
Yeah, okay, I was thinking. Yeah,
Mix them up.
Yeah, the mix them up one. Okay, yeah. Anyway, you should show me that footnote. I'll tell you if it aligns with things. But that's what it's based on, right? That's where the understanding of the sutra source for the Chepasung.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So before you mentioned about the importance of having Buddhist like stupas, statues,
Yeah.
and something that Zopar Rinpoche he
Yeah.
usually. So normally it says that is talking about the power of the object.
Yeah.
And how it can be beneficial, like for a fly that passes.
Yeah, it goes around in the stupa, yeah.
Sometimes I feel a bit skeptical about that.
Yeah.
Because so the power object, the object, what it means, right? Because a fly in the moment that is doing a kora around the stupa, she doesn't have refuge in her mind, doesn't have any basis for, for accumulating any kind of virtue related with that, or doesn't know is a stupa, doesn't probably even see it much. So how can an object itself, how can she benefit first? Like it doesn't depend of the mind that someone have some benefit from an object of devotion, because without devotion is not an object of devotion. Like without recognizing a statue as being a statue representing the Buddha, how can that piece of like some material molded in some form, give you some benefit?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a very good question. For one thing, I would point out this is more the Mahayana understanding than the Hinayana, we would say, or the Theravada. I'm not sure if they would accept this, right? I never actually asked them, but certainly we present it as this is the Mahayana presentation. It has to do with an understanding of emptiness, also, right? Because we say, well, how can a form molded in this particular way? What does it matter? But then we have to look more deeply at the way reality is. It's not that mind is something completely separate from matter. And so the object itself is charged with a particular kind of energy, we might say. I mean, in Tantra, they would talk about that. And so, we don't want to get too far away from the understanding of be your own master, right? That it's not like you just are around holy people and you're going to get enlightened. But there is something there. There is some kind of subtler level of reality of things that are affecting us, right? Our minds are not totally our own. The other things are energizing things in our mind, the things that we're around. And so the stupa itself is charged with a kind of energy because of the blessing of the Buddha, because of the blessing of the people, many people who have faith in it and circumambulate it. And so it's gaining a kind of charge, we could say. And then that, you could say, people are circumambulating that with faith, that particular path is gaining a kind of charge. So you're then following into that, right?
Could you say, because for me, the idea of blessing is always depending on your own attitude, your own mind.
Yeah.
So if you, like, for example, you get the blessing of a Buddha if you recognize your teacher as a Buddha.
Yeah.
If you recognize him as just a bodhisattva, you get the blessing of bodhisattva. If you recognize him just as a normal person, you don't get much blessing for that. So it's depending on your mind, the quantity of blessing you're receiving.
Well,
so
it certainly is taking some. It has a lot to do with your mind. It's going to be a lot stronger, but again, it goes a bit to a mystical level of this, right? It's like we have to let go a bit about there's me and there's a thing out there, right? If we think so discreetly, there's me and him and them, and then there's and then it's like everything I do only affects me. Everything he does only affects him. It has to do also with, like, Lama Rinpoche was debating me actually a few years ago at Kopan. If you can see it on the when Rinpoche was giving teachings that year, right? It's still recorded about this, like. How do when we pray for somebody who's died, how does it benefit them, right? In the Abhidharma Kosha, right, the Hinayana system, it does not benefit them. But in Abhidhamma Samachaya by Asanga, it does, right?
again, it's like if we think very discreetly that my mind is here and it's enclosed in my body and his mind is out there and it's enclosed in his body and they don't interact. But we have to maybe let go a bit of the solid understanding of self and other. And so then it comes into a bit of an understanding of emptiness, right? Again, you don't want to get the problem of falling into too extreme about it, and therefore I don't have to make any effort. It's just the Buddha's going to come and liberate me. But then we don't get too extreme of just, there's nothing more. It's all just, very purely rational and discrete entities, right? It's a hard thing, and it's certainly something I also and still do, struggled with early on, and it's something we should struggle with. It's not that we just said, you don't just accept these things because it says it in the text. You have to think about it and what it means, and also practice with your own experience. Have you had experiences of being around a holy object and noticing something happen in my mind as a result, and then you can start to have some sense of what they're talking about, perhaps. Yeah. Okay. And no other questions online, is there?
There were no more
Yeah.
questions. No.
Okay, yeah. We've gone a little overtime. I apologize. And since there's other people here too, so next week I'm going to be in Mysore. I won't be able to teach next week. We were thinking try to do 3 times a month on average. So we'll try to plan in 2 weeks. Let's see.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, being that the next week is the first Tuesday of the
month,
we can do that every first Tuesday.
Well, I think we have to look at the month, right? I might in June. I'm going to be in Bangalore 1 week, so
Okay.
we have to.
So we check that.
You have to check depending on the times of the month. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we could get to practice it a bit. Maybe. Two collections, vast the space that I have amassed from working at the effort of this practice for a great length of time, and become the chief leading Buddha for all those whose minds wisdom eye is blinded by ignorance. And those that at this state may be held in your loving compassion for all my lives Manjushri,
Here I'm the best cheap, but it pass the teachings. May I please all the Buddhas with my practice. Means by the strongest force of compassion. May I change mind from the darkness that points the path as I have discerned them. May I uphold the Buddha's teachings for a very long time. My heart going out with great compassion, with direction the most precious teachings have not yet spread, or once spread have declined. May I reveal this treasure of happiness and aid. The minds of those who wish for liberation be grounded boundless peace. And the Buddha's deeds be nourished for a very long time by even this graded course to enlightenment, completed due to the wonder is virtuous conduct of the Buddhas and their sons. Now the human beings who eliminated the diversity, created conditions, citizens for excellent paths, never be parted in any of their lives from the pure path praised by the Buddhas. Whenever someone makes an effort to act in accordance with the tenfold Mahayana virtuous practices, may never be assisted by the mighty ones. May the conditions of prosperity spread everywhere.